The moment she stepped onto the platform, the world seemed to hold its breath. Amara Wilson, a vision of grace in her finely crafted hat, now felt the weight of countless eyes upon her. There he stood, Harold Pierce, his expression a mask of shock, as if he'd encountered a specter rather than the woman he'd promised to wed. "This isn't going to work," he managed to choke out, his voice barely above a whisper, his face draining of color. "You didn't mention that you were black," Harold stammered, his words slicing through the air like a sharp, unexpected frost. Amara, her heart plummeting into despair, completed his thought. "Black, yes, I am. And in your letters, your words were so beautifully crafted. I imagined," she paused, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I imagined a man of depth, not one who would recoil at the sight of me." His bouquet, once vibrant, now seemed to wilt in his trembling hand. "Couldn't you have warned me?" he asked, his voice tinged with a mix of confusion and accusation. Amara inhaled deeply, her dignity rallying to her defense. "Tell you what exactly?" "That my skin is as dark as the night sky, yet my heart burns with the same fire as yours. You never inquired." The crowd at the station, now fully aware of the unfolding drama, whispered among themselves. In Riverbrook, a town where the unusual was news, the sight of a well-dressed black woman being publicly shunned by a white man was more than a spectacle. It was a moment of stark, painful revelation. Harold, sensing the growing attention, stepped back, his eyes darting around nervously. "You have to understand my position. The community here, my business," he muttered, his excuse as feeble as the flowers he held. "I can pay for your ticket back. You seem educated. I'm sure you'll understand." Amara felt a cold fury rise within her, not from sorrow, but from a seething, controlled anger that threatened to boil over. In this moment, she was more than just a rejected bride. She was a symbol of resilience, standing alone yet undaunted on the platform of a small town that had just shown its true colors. In his letters, Harold had painted a poignant picture of a 45-year-old widower's heart, a heart that yearned for companionship, understanding, and a second chance at love. Never once did he hint that this heart harbored any color preferences. "I've spent every penny I had to come here," she declared, her voice unwavering despite the quiver in her soul. "I have no place to return to." Harold moved by her. Plight reached into the depths of his pocket and retrieved a handful of crumpled bills. "This should suffice for a few nights' stay until you sort things out," he offered, his voice tinged with both hope and helplessness. Then, like a bolt from the blue, a deep, resonant voice shattered the heavy silence. "Is that your solution?" Pierce tossed money at the issue and pray it vanishes, as it always does. A towering figure emerged from the shadows, his gaze sharp enough to make the merchant Harold appear diminutive. Dressed in attire that spoke of wealth through its very simplicity, the man's sun-kissed skin told tales of outdoor adventures, yet his bearing was that of undeniable command. "This is none of your affair," Harold retorted, though his voice betrayed his unease. "It becomes my affair when I see a man I've known for 15 years acting like a coward." The man now known as Maxwell countered, his tone both firm and reproachful. Turning to Amara, his expression softened like a gentle breeze. "Miss, allow me to introduce myself, Alexander Maxwell. I own a property just outside the city." Amara nodded, her posture rigid with caution, her experiences having taught her that kindness from strangers often carried a hidden cost. "If I may be so bold," Alexander continued, his voice warm yet respectful, "I offer you lodging at my home until you've decided your next steps. We have guest rooms that seldom see use, and my housekeeper would welcome the company." Harold, visibly taken aback, seemed to choke on his next words, his attempt at control slipping through his fingers like sand. "Alexander Maxwell, you simply must be jesting. What will the townsfolk say?" Alexander's lips curled into a smile, icy and detached, devoid of warmth. "The very same townsfolk who transact with me daily, who rely on my land for their sustenance. What might they possibly say?" He pondered aloud, his voice tinged with a mix of amusement and challenge. Harold, now more aware of the underlying currents, paid even closer attention. Alexander Maxwell was not merely a farmer. He was the lord of the land, owning half the fertile fields in the region. Unbeknownst to those at the station, while Amara wrestled with her bruised pride and the harsh necessities of life, she harbored a secret that would shake the very foundations of this small community. A secret that would make Harold Pierce rue the day he judged someone's value by the color of their skin. Imagine, dear reader, the Maxwell estate, not merely a farm on the outskirts, as its owner might humbly claim, but a grand Victorian mansion. It stood majestically, surrounded by endless acres of verdant plantations and serene pastures where thoroughbred horses roamed in tranquil splendor. As Alexander's carriage rolled through the ornate gates, Amara was struck by a mix of awe and suspicion. People here, Alexander began gesturing towards the opulent main house, are not accustomed to differences. Riverbrook, he explained, was a place where time seemed to have stopped, where traditional families clung stubbornly to the past. Harold Pierce is but a symptom of a deeper malaise, he murmured almost to himself. The housekeeper, Mrs. Foster, a woman of middle age with eyes full of kindness, yet a posture of unbending professionalism, greeted Amara with a formal nod. If she harbored any shock at welcoming a guest of color, her demeanor did not betray it. As they traversed the labyrinthine corridors adorned with art that whispered tales of old, she led Amara to the blue room, its windows framing the garden's tranquil beauty. "I've prepared the room with the finest view of the garden," she announced, her voice a soft prelude to the evening's revelations. Dinner was a grand affair in the majestic dining room, where crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the polished mahogany table. Here, Alexander unfolded his life's narrative. Born to a northern banker and an abolitionist teacher, he was bequeathed not just wealth, but a legacy of equality and justice. Upon his arrival to Riverbrook 15 years prior, he was seen as an enigma, too affluent to be shunned, yet too distinct to be fully embraced. "And what of your story, Miss Wilson?" he inquired, his eyes gleaming with genuine curiosity after recounting his own ventures. "Your letters must have made quite the impression on Harold for him to extend such a formal invitation." Amara paused, her fork suspended in midair. There was something about Alexander's forthright gaze that coaxed her into sharing. "I was a teacher," she began, her voice tinged with the nostalgia of her past. "I taught literature and history in Boston at a school for girls of color. But when the school shut down due to financial woes, I knew it was time for a new beginning." What she left unsaid was the true catalyst behind her journey here. The unexpected inheritance from her grandfather, a man who had lived his life in service to the affluent. This inheritance wasn't merely gold coins, but ancient documents that could shift the very boundaries of Riverbrook. Documents she had concealed beneath a false bottom in her trunk. In the days that followed, Alexander offered Amara a rare gift, the freedom to ponder. The mansion's library, a sanctuary of knowledge, became her retreat. There she delved into texts on local history, geography, and the region's laws. When quizzed on her interests, she would merely smile her eyes, reflecting a world of possibilities. "I am merely broadening my horizons." A mere week had passed since her arrival, and already the whispers of her presence had woven through the tight-knit fabric of the small town like wildfire. The Maxwell mansion, once a quiet retreat, now buzzed with the comings and goings of the curious. The wives of merchants, the local reverend, and even the most reticent neighbors suddenly found themselves with pressing business to discuss with Alexander. "Would you look at that?" Alexander remarked with a wry twist of his lips, setting down his teacup as the latest delegation departed. "You've turned into the local spectacle without even gracing the town with your presence." Amara's smile was tinged with a bitterness that spoke volumes of her past. "I've always been a spectacle, Mr. Maxwell. The only difference now is I hold a porcelain teacup while being observed." It was amidst one such visit that Harold Pierce finally mustered the nerve to appear. His hat clutched nervously in his hands, his face a canvas of feigned concern. "Maxwell," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I just wanted to ensure Miss Wilson is settling in comfortably." "Absolutely delighted," Alexander retorted with a dryness that could wither flowers. "Why not inquire directly?" Harold's complexion paled as Amara entered, transformed from the weary, humiliated figure at the station into a vision of elegance in one of Mrs. Foster's meticulously altered dresses. She moved with a newfound grace and purpose. "Mr. Pierce," she greeted him with a voice as cold as the winter outside. "What an unexpected pleasure." Fidgeting with his hat, Harold stumbled over his words. "I came because the community is concerned about your well-being, Miss Wilson. They're quite concerned about your situation." His eyes darted to Alexander, who prompted, "Go on, Pierce. I'm intrigued to hear how you plan to conclude that thought." Harold swallowed his Adam's apple, bobbing visibly. "The church committee is contemplating measures to facilitate her return to Boston. A collection is being organized." Amara's smile was a mask, her eyes telling a story of resilience and unspoken battles. "How very kind of them," she said, her voice a soft, dangerous melody that promised more than it revealed. Harold's eyes widened, his voice laced with disbelief as he exclaimed, "Impossible! You have no connections here, no family, no bomb." Amara responded with a serene calmness. "On the contrary, Mr. Maxwell has graciously extended an offer. I am now the librarian of his estate, tasked with organizing the vast, chaotic collection of books amassed by generations of Maxwells." The shock on Harold's face morphed into a seething anger as he turned to Alexander, his voice barely containing his fury. "You cannot be serious." Alexander, with a nonchalant shrug, replied, "I have never been more so. Miss Wilson is both educated and capable. My library has never been in better hands." What Harold failed to grasp amidst his faltering protests was the profound significance of Amar's new role. Beyond the classics of literature, the Maxwell Library held secrets within its walls, land deeds, legal documents, and the entire historical tapestry of Riverbrook, including truths that many would prefer remain concealed. As Harold left his steps heavy with defeat and rage, Alexander observed from the window, his voice tinged with a warning, "He'll try to make your life difficult. The sting of humiliation you've given his pride today will not soon fade." Amara's eyes gleamed with a newfound resolve. "Let him try," she said firmly. "While he busies himself with spreading petty rumors, I'll delve deeper than he could ever anticipate." What Harold Pierce, and indeed all of Riverbrook, remained oblivious to was the meticulous purpose behind Amara's hours in the library. Amidst the yellowed papers and dusty tomes, she was assembling pieces of a puzzle that would expose a disquieting truth. The esteemed founding families of Riverbrook, including the Pierces, had amassed their wealth on lands that were not rightfully theirs. And as society buzzed with gossip and conjecture, Amara was unearthing a history that would challenge the very foundations of their town. 2 weeks had passed since Amara, a woman of color staying at the Maxwell mansion, began orchestrating a revelation that would rock the very foundation of Riverbrook. The air in the small hall of Riverbrook's town hall was thick with tension, the space bursting at the seams with the town's founding families, local merchants, and farmers from far and wide. Amidst the uproar, Harold Pierce stood, his face flushed with righteous anger, his arms flailing like the wings of an indignant bird. "It's an outrage," he bellowed, his voice slicing through the murmurs. "Maxwell dares to defy our traditions by harboring that woman on his property. Think of the scandal, the whispers of impropriety." Just then the heavy oak doors of the hall groaned open, and in walked Alexander Maxwell, his presence commanding silence. Behind him, Amara Wilson glided with the grace and poise of royalty, her eyes steady and unwavering. The room, once buzzing, now held its breath. "I appreciate the invitation." Alexander's voice, strong and clear, cut through the quiet. "However, I must clarify a grave misunderstanding. Miss Wilson is not here as my guest, but as the legal representative in a matter that intimately affects each of you." Harold's laughter, sharp and nervous, broke the silence. "Legal representative, a woman of color, uneducated with no authority. Maxwell, have you taken leave of your senses?" With the precision of a seasoned attorney, Amara opened her briefcase, her movements deliberate. "Actually, Mr. Pierce," she began, her voice calm yet firm, "in addition to being a certified teacher, I hold legal power of attorney. I am a direct descendant of Joseph Freeman." The name landed like a thunderclap in the hushed room, draining color from the faces of the elders. Joseph Freeman doesn't exist, Harold snapped, trying to reclaim his composure. Curious, Amara responded, her fingers deftly pulling out yellow documents. Because I have here the original deed signed by the governor in 1866, granting my great-grandfather, Joseph Freeman, a man freed after the Civil War, the land that today forms about 60% of Riverbrook, including Mr. Pierce, your very store. Judge Thornton shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the weight of history and justice now palpable in the air. Adjusting his glasses, Harold examined the documents Amara now unveiled. This, this looks authentic, he muttered, a tremor in his voice. It's a forgery, he shouted, though his words lacked conviction. Unfazed, Amara pressed on. The supporting records are here detailing how Joseph Freeman was forced to flee after attempted lynchings in 1870, and how the founding families carved up his land, forming what they called the Riverbrook Property Committee. Alexander interjected, his voice carrying a hint of intrigue. The Maxwell Library holds copies of all land records in this region. How curious that the specific session from 1870 to 1872 was missing until Miss Wilson discovered cross-references in other documents. Reverend Feller, an elderly figure, bowed his head solemnly. My father spoke of this story. He said it was a sin buried deep in our town's history. We're not here to punish the descendants for the sins of their ancestors, Amara declared with a fervor that commanded the room's attention. I propose a deal, the establishment of a community foundation to benefit all Riverbrook citizens, focusing on education and affordable housing. Harold Pierce laughed, a nervous, hollow sound. That's absurd. No one will believe this charade. At that moment, Attorney Jeffett, a respected lawyer known across 3 states, entered the hall. The documents have been verified by the State Historical Records Commission, he announced with authority. They are authentic, and I am pleased to inform you that the lawsuit has been formally filed. The hall erupted in a cacophony of raised voices and gasps. Amid the tumult, Harold, his face contorted with rage, lunged towards Amara. You planned this from the beginning, he hissed. That's what you were hiding in your letters. Amara's calm demeanor never wavered. No, Mr. Pierce, she replied softly, yet with a strength that belied her words. In those letters, I was merely a lonely woman seeking companionship. It was your immediate rejection of me when you saw me that revealed the kind of man you truly are. The kind who would judge my great-grandfather for the same reason you judge me, the color of our skin. You're going to ruin us, he whispered, his skin turning pale with despair. No, she responded, her voice a gentle whisper of resolve. I'm here to right a historical wrong in the most equitable way for all. The difference, Mr. Pierce, lies in our experiences. I've faced discrimination my entire life, yet I wouldn't wish anyone, not even you, to lose their home. As Harold Pierce sank into a chair, the weight of defeat heavy upon him, the city council retreated to ponder Amara's proposal. Alexander approached her, his eyes brimming with admiration. You could have claimed everything, he murmured, and become just like those who wronged my great-grandfather, she countered. Justice isn't about revenge, Alexander. It's about restoration. Unbeknownst to the council members, as they observed the woman they had dismissed and underestimated, the true metamorphosis of Riverbrook was only beginning. The legacy that would reverberate through the halls of power for generations wasn't about a woman bent on destruction, but one who, despite being hurt, chose to rebuild with grace and foresight. While Harold Pierce grappled with the crumbling of his reputation, Amara Wilson and Alexander Maxwell shared a glance that transcended mere land and legalities, a look that whispered of a future where acceptance was not dictated by skin color, but by the strength of one's character. 6 months after that pivotal encounter at City Hall, Riverbrook had undergone a remarkable transformation. The Freeman Foundation, fueled by funds reclaimed from past injustices, was already investing in scholarships for underprivileged youth and community enhancement projects. At the heart of this change stood Amara, not as a harbinger of vengeance, but as a visionary who looked beyond her own wounds. Harold Pierce's former store ironically now served as Riverbrook's inaugural public library, a sanctuary where once silent stories could finally find their voice. Harold himself had departed the town weeks ago, leaving behind a legacy of change he never anticipated. After the shocking revelation, he hastily sold his properties for a mere pittance, fleeing without so much as a farewell. Whispers floated through the air, suggesting he had taken up a humble position as a clerk in a nearby town. His pride, once towering, now lay as flat as his bank account. You could have obliterated him completely. Alexander remarked, his voice tinged with both admiration and disbelief as they wandered through the gardens of her estate. This estate, once a symbol of exclusivity, now thrived as a cultural hub where children laughed and played. Most would have squeezed every last penny out of him, he continued. Imar's smile was serene, her eyes following the joyful scene. Revenge would have given me fleeting satisfaction. She said, her voice soft yet firm. With a sweeping gesture, she indicated the transformed space. This, my dear, will provide joy for generations to come. The story of the Freeman heiress had transcended the borders of Riverbrook, drawing the attention of our journalists and historians eager to chronicle similar tales of land injustice. Invitations poured in for Amara to speak at universities, not just to share her personal journey, but to elucidate the legal strategies she employed to reclaim the truth. At a celebratory dinner in the main hall of what was now called Freeman Maxwell House, Judge Thornton, his voice thick with emotion, raised his glass in an unexpected toast. To the woman who showed us that justice is not merely a legal term, but a daily act. He declared, his words resonating with heartfelt sincerity. Martha Webb, now at the helm of the newly established community school, nodded in fervent agreement. And to think it all began with a cruel rejection at that train station. She mused, her eyes reflecting on the transformative journey. Alexander, taking Amara's hand, leaned in close. The best decision Harold Pierce ever made was to reject you, he whispered with a knowing smile. Though I doubt. In the heart of the old central square, where once only traditional families were celebrated, a new monument now stood tall. Not a grandiose statue, but a humble bronze plaque etched with the tale of Joseph Freeman. His land, unjustly seized, had at last returned to its rightful purpose of serving the entire community. As the velvet night blanketed Riverbrook, Amara gazed out from her new porch at the twinkling city lights. She had arrived as a stranger, cast aside, a black woman deemed unworthy of belonging. Yet here she was, not merely accepted, but revered, not for succumbing to the whims of others, but for her unwavering stand on her principles. When Alexander approached with 2 steaming cups of tea, Amara's mind wandered back to the winding path that led them to this moment. Isn't it ironic, she mused, her voice a soft echo in the night. Harold rejected me because he couldn't fathom sharing his life with someone who didn't fit into his narrow view of the world. And yet it was that very rejection that led to his downfall. While you, Alexander added, his voice warm with admiration, you thrived precisely because of what he despised: your strength, your history, your truth. The lesson Riverbrook learned, one that would resonate through the ages, was both simple and profound. When we judge someone by the superficial, we not only strip them of their humanity, but we also blind ourselves to the immense value they could offer to our lives. And as Amara Wilson Maxwell watched the moon ascend over the city that once turned her away, she realized that true revenge was not about retribution against Harold Pierce. It was about creating something so magnificent, so just and enduring, that his rejection would merely be a footnote in the grand tapestry of a story being woven. What could be more poetic than turning rejection into a cornerstone of communal renaissance? Let us remember, our differences are not walls, but wellsprings of might, capable of reshaping entire communities. Peace be with you. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Your thoughts, likes, shares, and subscriptions mean the world to us. Please leave a comment, let us know your thoughts, and become part of our ever-growing family.